Debate, the Honourable Member for Parkdale-High Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I rise today to speak on this bill really on behalf of my riding of Parkdale-High Park. Parkdale-High Park is an urban riding in the west end of Toronto, and it is home to communities that have come together from many different countries. There are people who came, like my grandparents, from the UK. There are people who've come from Asia, from Africa, from the US, from Europe, from all over, waves of different immigrants. Some came, like my family, with not much more than their ability for hard work and their desire to make a better life for themselves and their families, and people who were able to immigrate to this great country and have seen their family go on and make a contribution that was beyond their imagination at that time. And we see others who have come under real duress, people who've come as refugees, generations ago and more recently. For example, in my riding of Parkdale-High Park, we have the largest Tibetan community in Canada, people who have sought refuge sometimes decades ago from China, from the Tibetan region of China, and who have been living in refugee areas in Nepal or in India, people who come from Africa, from all parts of the world. And some of the stories they tell are harrowing. People who are trying to escape from extreme conditions, people who are trying to escape from a lack of political rights, religious rights, people who are trying to escape sometimes from very harrowing physical conditions. And my community also happens to be home to many new refugees from the Roma community. We have a large Roma community in our area. And I've met many members of this community. I have heard many stories. And I want to express the great concern that not just that community, but others in our city and across the country have expressed about these changes that are being proposed and are being brought before this House. Certainly, there is concern that this bill takes an approach of punishing refugees rather than looking to assist them and trying to help them in their hour of greatest need, and that the issue of human smuggling is one that it can already be adequately dealt with under existing legislation. We've heard from many who have said, listen, this same party, while in a minority government, just passed a balanced refugee reform bill last year, have just passed it, and it's not even been fully implemented. And now that compromise, which was worked out with all parties and passed by this House, now is going to be thrown out in favor of the provisions in this legislation. And once again, as this government is wont to do now that it has a majority, it's ramming this legislation through in a way that's especially troubling for those who perhaps don't share the perspective of this government and really want to have a very full airing of the provisions in this bill. I've also heard great concerns about the fact that this bill would concentrate power in the hands of the minister in terms of being able to treat refugees differently based on how they come to Canada, and concern about what that means in terms of equality before the law. Now, I've heard the minister, and the minister and I have certainly attended many events together at different community events in our area, and I know he tries to get to know newcomer communities well, and I think they appreciate that. But I I don't know how well he knows the Roma community. I've heard him say a lot about it, but I just want to read a letter from one member of the community, someone who is now a landed immigrant in Canada. He says, "My name is Roby Botos. I'm a Roma musician and composer. I came to Canada in 1998 from Budapest, Hungary. I saw the growing persecution and racism in the 1990s. With the support of the Canadian music scene, fans and friends, I was able to stay in Canada on humanitarian and compassionate grounds. Hungary did not become a safer country since I left. In fact, it's become much worse. Today, if you're a Roma living in Hungary, your life is clearly in danger from the growing fascist movement. There are many evidences of that. All you need to do is just get on the internet and see for yourself." And I've done more than that. I have talked to many community members in our area. I fell in love with Canada because I saw that people don't discriminate against me and they support me for who I am. I won 2 of the biggest piano competitions in the world as a Canadian Roma artist. I got many awards, including the National Jazz Award, the recent Juno nominations. They announced me as a Canadian national treasure. I shared the stage with my biggest hero, the great Canadian legend, Oscar Peterson. I say this because just a few weeks back I was at the edge of being deported, and if Bill C-31 would have been in effect and I had to go back to Hungary, my son could have been the boy who they shot 18 times because he was a Roma. I did not come to Canada to take advantage of the Canadian welfare system or be a criminal. Like most Roma refugees, I sold everything I ever had to be able to buy airplane tickets, knowing I'll lose it all if I have to go back. I came here with no English skills and no guarantees. I'm deeply disappointed about the Canadian immigration discriminating against Roma refugees by referring to them as bogus refugees, that they're even considering calling Hungary a safe country for the Roma people. That's not the Canadian way. They should at least research first. I dream that the Canadian immigration system will act Canadian by protecting Roma refugees and not threatening them by sending them back where their life is in great danger. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak on behalf of my people. Mr. Speaker, I guess I'm concerned, first of all, that here in Canada there have been comments made about the Roma community that really impugn their reputation. I have met many people face to face, know them, hear their stories, know the contribution they're making to our community, and know the insecurity and the fear that they feel about losing the opportunity to be here in safety and go back to persecution. I'm concerned that our government would have made changes to the immigration and refugee legislation just a year ago, and today is throwing those changes out and is introducing changes that will create 2 tiers of refugees and deny people who are seeking safety here the opportunity to remain in Canada. I've done a lot of work with organizations like the Canadian Council for Refugees, who's calling for this bill to be completely scrapped. The Canadian Bar Association is concerned that it violates charter protections against arbitrary detention, and the Civil Liberties Association has also been very critical and is calling the measures contemplated draconian. And I see my time is almost up, but I'm really trying to speak out on behalf of the people that I've seen face to face, families who come here with very little and have had terrible experiences of discrimination and in some cases violence, and they see Canada as a refuge. I'd hate to think that with our reputation for human rights and for respecting international agreements around the world, that somehow we would turn our backs on people in their hour of need. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Minister of Immigration.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank the member for participating in the debate. I think she's misinformed in a number of respects, one of which is the suggestion that Roma asylum claimants are not being fairly considered by our refugee system. Nothing could be further from the truth, Mr. Speaker. Claimants under the current system and under the system proposed by Bill C-31, claimants from whatever country of origin or whatever ethnicity, whatever cultural, racial background will all have the same access to the same fair and independent quasi-judicial process on the merits of their claim before an independent decision-maker of the quasi-judicial IRB in a manner that's consistent with natural justice and due process, that exceeds the requirements of the Charter of Rights in the the 1951 Refugee Convention. Now, she raises this notion that that somehow there's a negative prejudice associated with asylum claims from European Roma. I have certainly done nothing to suggest such a negative prejudice. What I have done, however, is to comment on the objective mathematical fact that since we granted a visa exemptions for several European countries in 2007 and 8, some 95% of the European asylum claimants have not shown up for their own refugee hearing at the IRB and have abandoned or withdrawn their own claims. And of the tiny fraction that went to adjudication, only a tiny fraction of those were deemed to actually be well-founded asylum claims. Is she not concerned to see such a large wave of demonstrably unfounded asylum claims in our system, not based on my opinion, but on the actions of the claimants themselves?
The honourable member for Parkdale-High Park.
Well, I have to ask the minister, why is it that a year ago more than 100 Roma refugees would be accepted here in Canada, accepted by Canada as refugees, from Hungary or from the Czech Republic, Roma refugees accepted here, and now under this legislation, if these are designated as safe countries, these refugees would not be accepted. So a year ago, they were refugees, but under this safe country designation, they would not be refugees. So what's changed? From what I hear from the Roma community, conditions have gotten worse, not better. So why would we allow them to be put at risk?
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Winnipeg North.
Speaker, the member made reference to the issue of mandatory detention and then alluded to the fact that the current system, and it's something which I've been saying for quite a while now, is that we have been told, the committee has been told, the Immigration Citizenship Committee, that the current system of detention was actually working quite well. It was proving to be effective. It was holding people in detention as long as necessary in order to be able to alleviate both public security and health concerns. So it begs the question, that being, why change something when it appeared to be actually working quite well? It had nothing to do with the processing times that all parties are concerned about, but it had everything to do with the fact of how to detain someone, and that system seemed to work. So why would the government want to make that change at this time? What does she suspect is the motivation?
The honourable member for Parkdale-High Park.
Well, I thank the honourable member for his question. I don't want to speculate as to the government's motivation for bringing in this change, but I do share his concern that, for example, children could be detained under this legislation. I don't think that's right. I don't think it's appropriate. And I do share his concern that just a year ago, all parties agreed on changes to the immigration and refugee legislation, and there was a balanced approach, and while no one felt it was perfect, there was compromise, and there hasn't even been time for that legislation really to fully be implemented and for us to see the outcome of that legislation. And now the minister wants to sweep aside that compromise and bring in these changes, which is troubling to many of those who are affected directly.